Welcome, human geographers. We're going to cover urban geography. So, as the civilization and populations grown throughout the world, we've seen pretty large, significant trends as far as people living in cities. So, we're going to talk about that today. Urbanization through time. Today, just over 54% of human beings live in cities. By 2050, the UN estimates that this figure will stand at 70%. We already have countries throughout the world, for instance, Australia, where about 80% of the population lives in cities. Really interesting. There are differing patterns of urbanized population. Worldwide population growth in the next several decades will be concentrated in urban areas. We do know that, such a trend. Complicating and understanding the process of urbanization is lack of a standard definition. The criteria to calculate or figure out a country's urbanized population differs from nation to nation, so it's kind of hard to quantify that. But here's where we see urban populations. Okay, so we see it very high in Canada, United States, Australia, which I referred to earlier, Brazil, some of South America, South America. Okay, brief history. Most of our existence lived in small nomadic groups from groups of 25 to 50 hunters and gatherers. Groups eventually became sedentary and formed into small villages. Permanent agricultural villages developed about 10,000 years ago. Neolithic settlements that date from 9,000 BC to 7,500 BC are considered by some archaeologists to be the first early cities. First true cities, urban satellites, date back to 4,000 in Mesopotamia. They're a half to 2 square miles. Populations rarely exceeds 30,000. Density within the cities could reach 10,000 people per square mile. Not all cities were involved in developing and obtaining food. So here we see some origination of that. So 2 elements were true to cities as far as their form: agricultural surplus, so how to store food, get through troubled times or future development of a stratified social system. So hydraulic civilization, we had several models for this, assumes that the development of large-scale irrigation systems was primary driver of urbanization. That's the idea of it. Existed in China, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Parts of Mesopotamia, urban civilization blossomed out through irrigated agriculture. We have urban hearth areas, which you see the Yellow River of China, Pakistan's Indus River Valley, Nile River. See several areas of this. We definitely see this with the Ganges in India also. First cities in Mesopotamia and elsewhere were cosmological cities, arranged spatially consorting to religious principles. Axis Mundi, symbolic center of the cosmological cities, demarcated by a vertical structure. So see a map of that. Some of these cities, original urban areas, imperialism and urbanization. No doubt diffusion has been responsible for the dispersal of cities in historical times. Process not always proceeded without opposition. So here we see some urbanization and migration through what we call diffusion of certain empires, ancient empires and imperial expansionism. Roman civilization supplanted ancient Greece, itself on a city known as Rome. Ancient Greek civilization, which both Western civilization and Western city trace their roots. Fundamental Roman cities was the gridiron street pattern, composed of straight streets intersecting at right angles. Example, in France, where we see aqueduct striking area. Pre-quest technician, mural by Mexican artist. Second urban revolution, rose societies in Western Europe and later North America became industrialized. Capitalism reshaped cities of Western Europe beginning in mid-16th, mid-18th. Economically driven through capitalism. Early cities tend to be located in places where they're easily defended, islands, hilltops, shelter harbors, for geopolitical purposes. Here's an example, classic defensive site, Mont Saint-Michel, France. So we have CPT, Central Place Theory, Kristaller, Set of Miles attempts to understand why cities are located where they are. Kristaller understood cities primarily as economic centers concerned with distributing goods to people. Travel distances dictated placement of different orders of settlements. So here we see first order, second order, and third order. It really kind of has to do with allocation, where things could be transported and people could travel. Threshold, size of populations to make provision of goods and services economically feasible. So how far would you go for a good or a service? Range, average, maximum distance people will travel to. So we saw in the earlier slide a really good distribution of that. We have natural population increase, rural to urban migration, urban to urban migration as causes of modern urbanization. Megacities, over 10 million people. Unemployment rates in cities of the developing world are often 50% for newcomers to the city. So a lot of it is the know-how of the area. Map of the world's megalopoli. Primate city, large city, and dominant power within a country. Buenos Aires in Argentina, London in England. Most of the world's population lives in mid-sized cities of 550,000 or less, 500,000 or less. Remember, we talked about the early population settlements not being more than 30,000, and then we opened with this chapter on urbanization talking about how populations are going to, by 2050, are going to increase to 70% in cities. So we definitely see that trend wherever we look. Urban transportation, streetcar suburbs, basically where streetcar lines can take people out, affects where the development occurs. Cities become increasingly polluted is a downside. Safety becomes a concern, lots of transportation, lots of things going on. Traffic congestion, individual commuters spend a lot of time, a great portion of the day in the car. 10 worst commutes we see in the United States. Hours spent in traffic annually, pretty large numbers, especially in Los Angeles and New York. Global cities basically have global economies, so we have distribution between them. Sample of global cities. We have several in the United States, several in East Asia, Buenos Aires in South America, Sydney in Australia. Okay. Rise of global cities, rise of global cosmopolitan class. Leading global cities are the super rich. And then we have urban poverty, so development isn't really based on much urban planning or development. We have things called shanty towns, basically built out areas with whatever can be found, more like shelters than houses. Urban weather and climate, we have urban heat island, essentially concrete and building materials, concrete, steel, all the things used to build in cities that we utilize tend to conduct heat. Also, all of the concrete, asphalt, so forth, that conducts heat also, which tends to make the area around major cities heat up. Here's a sample of that. Cute graphic. Urban hydrology, residential areas are usually greatest consumers of water in urban areas. Very interesting. So urban vegetation, some pros and cons of that. 2/3 of North America city is composed of trees and herbaceous plants. Reduces wind velocity, affects pattern of snow, influences quantity and quality, absorbs airborne particulates, muffles the city's noise, distribution of natural and artificial light. Is an important component in the development of soil profiles. We're going to get into city footprints now. So urban footprint, supplying water to cities by diverting rivers. We see quite a bit of this. In fact, we talked about this with Rome as far as the lot system, survey stuff, another part of the class. Desert suburb, basically building out within the desert area. Natural disasters, dense concentrations of people, disasters are more destructive, makes them more vulnerable. Even further with shanty towns where not any formal development. Cities can take measures that attempt to mitigate or lessen. In Latin America, cities lead the pack with 90% of the region's cities engaging in some form of climate change adaptation planning. So we see some resilience for that. Planning for climate change, Latin America, Canada, a lot of that depends on the viability for the country and the people that do that. Resilience, ability to predict future trends. determine things. Gentrification, displacement of lower income residents and economic activities by higher income residents. It's kind of like rebuilding an area, revitalizing it. There's an example of that. Areas being built out, improved. Deindustrialization, decline of industry, accompanied by rise in service and information sectors of the economy. More on gentrification. As far as ownership is used throughout the world, increased car ownership and use. We see all these different things coming out to that for transportation. Right to the city, urban features, shopping malls, public places. Certain groups are denied access to certain parts of the city. Public spaces within cities. So we deal with all these logistics, right? Then we have crime prevention through environmental design. So hope you enjoyed this chapter. It's pretty insightful, and we are getting near the end, and we'll do a wrap up here pretty quickly, and then we will conclude the class. So hope you're enjoying human geography.